Children's Church. Psalm 3 is what we just sang part of it. This psalm was written by David while he was running for his life from his son Absalom. As you read those, or as you sing those words, he's a lifter of my head. Can you imagine as a parent, if you are running for your life from your child? That's where David was. The song we just sang was a song about the God who delivers us in all sorts of evil and all sorts of hard times. Today, we're going to be opening up and we're going to be looking at John. Before we get there, my opening illustration's not an illustration at all. It is a question. Ready? I open this way a lot of times. Who can tell me what type of liquid you can walk on? Adam.
Non-Newtonian fluid.
A non-Newtonian fluid. What would you like? So first of all, which kind? You want dark chocolate, crackle, or Hershey's? All right, here we go. That's good stuff. I didn't think beggars could be choosers. I was wrong. A non-Newtonian fluid. Now, one of them that you're all familiar with, what a non-Newtonian fluid is this. It is a fluid that has viscosity-ish, or when you apply pressure to it, the viscosity will change. It'll either get thinner or thicker based on applying pressure to it. One of those, remember the old Heinz 57 ketchup? You'd go like this and it wouldn't come out. So what would you do? You'd tap it here. Ketchup, because I guess the salt in it, it becomes a non-Newtonian liquid. When you tap here and you apply, if you will, pressure to it, it actually becomes less viscous and then it flows out. Now, there's a thing that I learned in science class back in probably 8th grade, I think it was. They took cornstarch and water, and I thought they called it goo yuck, but I think it's actually oobleck. I've thought for years it's goo yuck, and I kept thinking, well, that's just what my science teacher said, and I was going through my mind like, goo yuck, oobleck sound very similar. I bet you I remember it wrong. So I'm going to assume that my memory was bad. It's oobleck. You mix those together, and you can literally like form it into a ball in your hand, but as soon as you stop moving it, it'll go through your fingers just like water. It's crazy stuff. Well, I got a video I want to show you of some people who took oobleck and they took it to the next level, and it's really cool.
We're creating the biggest oobleck pool I have ever seen. This requires a 13-ton cement mixer, 9 tons of oobleck, and a 25-foot-long pool.
3, 2, 1, go for it. Success!
So you can see the pressure of the foot striking the surface causes the liquid to thicken enough to support the runner, but the substance will not stay solid for long. Once the runner stops lifting his or her feet, force stops being transferred to the oobleck. And when the particles of cornstarch are no longer squeezed together by force, water fills in the gaps between the particles, and the oobleck returns to a more liquid state. It seems the only way not to get stuck or fall through the oobleck is to continue to apply force to the particles. Next up, bicycles.
Are we ready for our bicycle? Yeah. You and I agree, my friend. So he's got to build up enough speed. But here we go.
To go faster, he pedals the bike hard, which creates enough downward force to make the liquid behave like a solid. But let's see if entering from a standstill with far less pedaling and speed will change things for our fearless rider.
John 6, we come across Jesus walking on water, and the reality is he did not turn it into oobleck. But as you get into Jesus walking on water, there's actually 3 accounts of Jesus walking on water. John's is by far the shortest account, and it leaves off some details that that Matthew and Mark include that I think are significant. We'll talk a little bit about the whys. John has a shorter rendering, but I want you to remember this, a few things. One, Jesus walking in water is sandwiched in between the feeding of the 5,000 and then his explanation on how he is the bread of life. When the disciples get on that boat, we'll see, they still didn't understand the significance of the feeding of the 5,000, but they all were in awe of Jesus walking on water. This is not the first time that Jesus demonstrated his power over nature. In fact, earlier in the Gospels, Jesus went onto the boat with them. They're out in the sea. The storms are coming. The boat was filling up with water, and Jesus said what? Peace be still. And the waters calmed, and they rode in safely. Because of the shorter passage, I'm going to take some liberty this morning. We're going to start off with some geographic and political background to the Gospels, because I think it'll help you as you're reading through the Gospels, kind of open your eyes to what's going on here. So we're going to take a related rabbit trail to get us started today. So I want to talk about first the geographic area where the Sea of Galilee is at. So I'm going to take control of the clicker, I think. Actually, we'll talk about the signs first. Apologize for that. So you look at the different signs. We look at these last couple of weeks. I want you to connect the dots. When he says, I'm the bread of life, that connects to the feeding of the 5,000. He's going to talk about that I am statement. Another I am statement he makes is, I am the light of the world. And I believe you can connect that right down to when he allows the blind man to receive sight. He is the light of the world. He gives physical light to this man, just as he gives spiritual light to all whose eyes are open through salvation. He says that he is the resurrection and the life. And we see that in connection to when he raises Lazarus physically. When he says he is the resurrection and life, he's talking about more than just physical resurrection. He's talking about spiritual resurrection from the dead as well. Another thing that's kind of interesting in the signs that he gives 3 signs that would be considered nature signs, where he demonstrates he has power over the natural realm. He is able to change the laws of nature, if you will bend them to his will whenever he wants to. When he changes the water into wine, he literally turns back the clock to turn grape juice into wine, and he changes the very construction of the water to turn it into grape juice or turn it into wine. So there he shows his power over the created realm. When he feeds the 5,000, he multiplies the bread and the fish, showing his power over nature. When he walks on water, he calms the storm. He immediately brings the boat to shore. He shows that he has power over the natural created realm. When he heals the official son, the paralyzed man, the blind man, he resurrects Lazarus to life. He shows his power over, if you will, the ability to heal supernaturally. In every one of those situations, it wasn't a doctor who came in, diagnosed the problem, and fixed what was going on internally. Jesus simply either spoke the words or said it to be true, and the person was instantaneously healed. We serve a God who has power over nature. He has power over the physical realm. He doesn't always heal like this. He doesn't always calm the storms like he does here in these signs, these miracles that point to him. But I want us to remember that is the God that we serve. He is the God who is king over everything. Now, going to kind of the Sea of Galilee, 85% of the Gospels, the miracles and the teaching that Jesus does, takes place around the Sea of Galilee. Sea of Galilee is about 7 miles wide and 15 miles long, or 8 miles wide, 17 miles long. So it's not a very big lake. It's not really a sea, it's a lake, but they call it the Sea of Galilee, or Yom Kinneret, the Sea of Gennesaret. On the northwest shore, in and around Capernaum, it was primarily Jewish. So surrounding the Sea of Galilee was mostly Jewish, especially the north end. So if you look at the miracles that Jesus does, most of them take place on the north end. That's where the highest population of people, specifically Jews, was at. So as you're reading through, you have a map with you, you'll notice a lot of them take place up there. There are a couple times when he deviates from that. He actually goes to a Gentile region of the Sea of Galilee and performs just a couple miracles over there. This is kind of a neat map. If you see up here at Bethsaida, that's where the feeding of the 5,000 took place, actually up kind of the mountains in this area. This area up here today is known as where's Brent at? What's this area known as up here? The Golan Heights. I'll show you a picture of that real brief. Maybe I will. There you go. There'll be a picture of one portion of the Golan Heights. around, I think that's Tiberias right there. Yeah, Tiberias is there. What happens is the mountains here are about 4,000 feet in elevation, and the Sea of Galilee sits somewhere between 650 and 700 feet below sea level. So as the winds come in, they will rush across the sea, which is why storms were common on that sea. Capernaum is Jesus' kind of hometown. He claims it his own. A lot of the miracles take place there. Right in this area, the drowning of the swine, this is actually the Gentile region. It's kind of significant that he drowned swine because sometimes the Gentiles were known as pigs, and that's what they're referred to by the Jews. And so for him to drown swine, there's kind of picturesque of what's going on there. Multiplication of loaves of fish. And you'll notice in Matthew, it should be 11:21, Jesus says, "Woe to you, Chorazin, woe to you, Bethsaida. If the miracles that took place in this area had been shown to Sodom and Gomorrah, they would have long ago repented." You remember the Old Testament story of Sodom and Gomorrah, don't you? They lived sexually immoral lives. They were probably also idolatrous, and God wiped them out with hail and brimstone. And he says to Chorazin, he says to Bethsaida, "After all that you have seen from me, from my hands, if Sodom and Gomorrah had seen this, they would have long ago repented. It's going to be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than it will be for you." Right down here is Tiberias, and you'll notice it says it's the capital of Antipas the fox. Do you see these red lines here and here? When Herod the Great died in 4 BC, he divided up his kingdom, and 2 of the tetrarchs, areas of land that were controlled, one of them's up here, and Philip controlled this area, sometimes known as Philip II. And then right here, this is Herod Antipas, and his region, we'll see, extends all the way down into here. Notice any significant cities in this area? Notice any significant cities right there? Jerusalem. So he had control all the way from kind of the north and the west side of the Sea of Galilee, all the way through is his control. He was sometimes known as the fox. One of the things I want you to notice this is when Jesus would go to different cities, if you follow them on a map, many times what he is doing, he's going from the tetrarchy of Philip right here over to the tetrarchy of Herod Antipas. He's going, if you will, he's changing dominions, changing rulership. So he does a miracle here, and before they can do anything in his tetrarch, he goes across the other side. So when he goes, he's leaving political powers back and forth. So as you track through the Gospels, it's kind of interesting, the whys of why did he go back and forth. Sometimes it's directly related to, he causes a stir here. Before they can act on it, he goes over to the other side. He goes, if you will, out of their jurisdiction. So Jesus, a lot of this back and forth. You notice right here, the Decapolis, this is right here, that is the portion controlled by the Gentiles and not under Philip or Antipas. It was actually independent, it says, under Syria. So this area here is kind of a completely different demographic. It's mostly Gentile. So as you're going through your Bible, as you're studying the Gospels, that kind of gives you some background of what's going on. I'm going to talk to you a little about Philip II, the Tetrarch. Interesting guy. He was a little bit more of a fair-minded ruler from all accounts, but his marriage was interesting. He was married to Salome. We don't know if it's Salome the first or Salome the second. If it was Salome the first, that would have been his half-sister, who was 39 years younger than him. Kind of gross. Weird. No, sorry, that would have been the daughter of his brother. It would have been his niece. So it would have been Herod Antipas's daughter, the same one that is going to dance for Herod Antipas's guests. And if you remember the story, Salome dances. It pleases Herod because his guests were pleased, and he said that she was a 14-year-old at the time. So weird dynamics going on there. And Antipas said, "I'll grant you up to half my kingdom." Well, Salome goes to her mom, Herodias, and says, "I want John the Baptist's head on a platter." And so Herod Antipas reluctantly brings John the Baptist's head to him. Why did Salome, or why did Herodias dislike John the Baptist so much? Well, not only is this marriage, not only is this marriage either a half-sister who is within 4 years of his age, or a niece that is 39 years younger than him. Not only is that a bizarre marriage, Herodias was the wife of Herod Philip I, and before Herod Philip I died, she divorced her husband. Herod Antipas divorced his wife, and they got married. And John the Baptist is going around proclaiming that this marriage is not lawful. This shouldn't be happening. This should not be a recognized marriage. So Herodias wanted to shut John the Baptist up. She thought cutting off his head was the best way to do it. And so this is the context in which we drop ourselves in. Jesus is crisscrossing the domains of these two Herods. And this is all happening in the context of John the Baptist had just recently been executed. Remember we talked about last week, the feeding the 5,000 is the next event after John the Baptist beheaded, probably 6 months following his death. The other thing interesting about Herod Antipas, he is also involved in the crucifixion of Jesus. So when you have the false trials going on, he is part of one of them. So he would have ultimately given the yes to the crucifixion of Jesus. I share these things because as you go through the Gospels, it'll kind of help you understand what the dynamics are when Jesus says different things, when Jesus is going different locations. This also kind of comes into play with how you understand the Gospels working out. So with that, what I want to do is I want to jump into the text. We've already read the John 6 account. What I want to do to kind of give us a fuller view is I want to look at Matthew and Mark's accounting of Jesus walking on water. So it's one account from 3 different Gospels, or one miracle, 3 different accounts. John 6, we've already read through that. I want us to look at Mark's account. Everything you see in yellow will kind of, if you will, add to the story that we already know from John. So it says this, verse 45, immediately he made his disciples get into the boat. So when Jesus comes down, in the John account, it looks like they reluctantly, it gets dark, okay, I guess we're going to go across. I don't know where Jesus is. We actually find out that Jesus brought the disciples down to the boat, got them away from the crowds, and put them on the boat, and they were supposed to take off to go to Capernaum. It seems from the passage they actually waited around for a while, waiting for Jesus to come back. Where did Jesus go? And it says, and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had been taken leave of them, he went up to the mountain to pray. So Jesus dismisses the disciples. He goes up into the mountains to pray. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. And he saw they were making headway painfully. Verse 48 is also new to this thing. Jesus is praying, and he can see what's going on with the disciples on the boat. We see here that God is omniscient. Jesus knows everything. There's another passage in the Gospels where Jesus sees Philip sitting underneath a tree, even though Jesus is not physically present. So Jesus, as God, was able to see that the disciples were struggling out in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. If you're to look at a map, from where they took off to where they're going is approximately 4 miles. And it says they're about 3 to 4 miles into it. The winds have been coming down, so you can imagine they're at the north end of the lake. As they're trying to go this direction, the wind is coming down at them, so they're getting pushed away from shore. They're getting pushed away from where they're trying to go, and they're struggling. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the 4th watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. The 4th watch was between 12 and 3 a.m. in the commentaries I read, so they've been at this for a while. They wait to take off until the sun has set, waiting for Jesus. He doesn't show, so they take off. They take off in the dark. It's now the middle of the night, 12 to 3 a.m. He came to them walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them. I studied that out quite a bit, and I don't know exactly what is meant there. Was it he intended just to kind of walk on by them, but then they called out his name, so he stopped? That doesn't make sense to me intellectually, but it's there, so I don't know what to do with it exactly, other than he was kind of passing by, and they see him, and they are going to call him in. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost. The word we get from that is phantom. So they see this man walking on the sea, and they don't even know how to interpret that. I did a deep dive on that to find out what was At the time of Jesus, people believe in ghosts, and there's kind of split thoughts on it. I couldn't find anything conclusive. We do know this, is when they saw Jesus walking on the water, they didn't know what to do with it, and their first response was, it must be some kind of aberration, it must be some kind of phantom, it must be some kind of ghost. One of the guys, actually it was Brent, we were talking on Tuesday. I'm assuming you probably heard this one is Israel. There may have been a belief at that time that before a sailor would drown, a ghost would appear, a phantom would appear, if you will, to take their soul. I couldn't find that in any of the commentaries, some of the other deep dives I went to, so I don't know, but I found there's a lot of cool stuff you find out in Israel from your tour guide. I don't know how much of it is rooted in real study of that time, so I don't know. But if that is the case, that would make a lot of sense, wouldn't it? They see what they think is a ghost, and like, uh-oh, this is it for us. Both Matthew and Mark record that. And they cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid. I want you to remember that phrase. That's really where we're going to kind of land today. In the middle of the storm, in the middle of their struggle, in the middle of seeing this aberration they believed, Jesus speaks to them and says, it's me. Don't be afraid. Don't lose heart. And he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded. In John's passage, it says the wind ceased, and it says, and they were immediately at shore. So there's several miracles that take place here. He makes the wind cease. He's walking on water. He sees them from afar, and then immediately when the wind stops, they're at the shore. So there's all kinds of miracles going on in this one miracle, this one account. And they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. One of the things that is common to both Matthew and Mark's account is this idea of they just got off this huge miracle of Jesus feeding the possibly 20,000, and they didn't understand, if you will, the weightiness and the power of their God, of this Jesus in front of them. They didn't understand that he was offering himself as the bread of life. They didn't get it. But when they're on the ocean and he calms the sea, they were utterly astounded. We're going to see in the Matthew account, they believe that he is the Son of God. Something happened on that boat where those disciples, their faith was deepened, strengthened, their understanding of their God was broadened. I love that because God does that in my life as well. I put my faith in Jesus Christ as a 5-year-old, became part of his family. I am his child, not because of anything I have ever done, but because he is faithful to his word to save me. But I found that as I grow, there are times that God gives me aha moments. And he shows himself through his word, through the stuff of life, how awesome and powerful and great he is. And for the disciples, this is another one of those aha moments. And this was not the first time, remember, that Jesus had shown himself on the waters. He calmed the storms earlier, and here he walks on the water, calms the storm, brings their boat miraculously to shore immediately. Now, Matthew's account is almost identical through the first several verses, but it gets very different at verse 28. Watch this. It says, and Peter answered him, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. I can't for the life of me figure out why Mark doesn't put this in there. I have no idea why John doesn't put that in here. Peter walking on water, that's a big deal, isn't it? If I were to tell you this story, I think I'd remember if someone's walking on water. I would not remember. I would tell you that part of the story. To me, it'd be significant. My only explanation I can think of is why does Matthew include this, but Mark and John do not, is the purpose of sharing the miracles, the signs in the book of John, is so that we would what? Believe. Believe in who? Jesus, not in Peter. And so it may be that Mark and John both say Peter walking on water, as significant as it is or was, it's not the central storyline. The central storyline is Jesus, who is commander of the seas. He doesn't just calm them, he walks on them. And so I really be with John and Mark both, is they want the center of attention to be on Jesus, not, if you will, to be distracted by the Peter story. Matthew writes this, and Peter answered him, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. He said, come. So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? I want to remind you that all the rest of the disciples are still on the boat. So before we crucify Peter here, I want you to be reminded that Peter was the only one who stepped out. Peter was the only one who made a move. And Jesus did, rebuke him, Oh, you of little faith. I'm thankful for Peter, because I don't know about the rest of you guys. There's sometimes I step out in boldness and faith, and I'm in. And it doesn't take a whole lot of problems before I'm out. I'm looking around at everything else going on, and oh, you, David King of little faith. I'm with you, Peter. And when they got in the boat, the wind ceased. And check out this last part. Here's how Matthew ends the account. And those in the boat worshiped him, saying, Truly, you are what? The Son of God. Why did John, Matthew, and Mark include this miracle? I do believe in large part this was one of those miracles that made, if you will, a deep impact into the lives of his followers. In Mark, they couldn't even put into words how marveled they were by what just happened. In Matthew, their response is awe, and truly you are God in the flesh. You are the Son of God. Why include this miracle? When you look at the book of John, we look at that passage. I'm going to have you turn back there to John chapter 6. And I want you to, in your Bibles, look there. It has Jesus feeds the 5,000, and then verse 22, I'm the bread of life. The whole point of John chapter 6 is a demonstration of what? Jesus is more than a great provider for your physical sustenance. If you're running after Jesus for your bread and your fish, and that is it, you missed it. We're going to talk about that next week. He is offering himself as your very sustenance. He is the bread of life. He's not the provider of, he is the provision. And then you have this little few verses, Jesus walking on water, and there seems to be no connection between this miracle and the rest of the story, other than possibly it's a further demonstration that he is the miracle worker over all of nature. You think the provision of making more food and these bread and the fish multiply, you think that was amazing? Hey, fishermen, let me show you something else that's really amazing. You saw me calm the storms once, which is pretty great. I'm going to show you that I can even walk on this stuff. And he demonstrates that he has control and dominion over the created realm. My son just got back from Indiana Wesleyan signing up for classes. I think he's taking chemistry next year. Kind of a side note, but not completely. I would love for our church family to raise up kids that are gifted and skilled in the sciences. Because the God who created nature, the God who created us, put within his creation so much order. It was designed to be studied. It was designed to be known so that, according to Romans, we would glorify the creator of this world. We would see his order. We would see his incredible design and intelligence in the created realm. Man, I would love to see a generation raised up in our churches that don't run from the sciences because of it being hijacked by evolutionists, but they run to the God of those sciences, because science is the study of creation, of the created realm, and I believe Christians should be the best at it, because the God we worship is the God who created it, and we should know it, and we should know it well. When God shows he has the power over nature, it gives an explanation to why sometimes things don't follow the created order. Because God intervenes and he bends nature to his will. Can our God still do miracles? Absolutely. We don't have praying services and praying over people, be healed, because it's my understanding from Scripture, the gift of healing, where people just went out and they were healed by touching something, by praying over, and they were just instantaneously healed. That was a gift to the early church to confirm the message of the gospel. But can the God who healed through the gift of healing still heal through miraculous ways? The answer is yes. Can he remove cancer in a moment? Yes. Can he do things in the human body that's beyond our comprehension and understanding? Yes, because he is the God of nature and he can bend it at his will if he so desires. That's the God we worship. And we don't worship him so that he will bend nature to our whim. We worship him because he can, and he is powerful and awesome. And whether he allows us to see it with our own two eyes, that's the God we worship. He is the God of nature. He fed the 5,000. He calmed the storms. He walked on water. I believe one of the other reasons he includes this is this miracle was a turning point for the disciples in their personal belief that Jesus was indeed the Son of God. John says that all these were written that we would what? Believe that Jesus the Christ, the Son of the living God. One of the cool things about being a pastor is I get to hear people's stories of faith, how they came to faith, what God's doing in their life. And we have a God who knows us so well that he reveals himself through his word, through the Spirit of God that is in us, through the people of God, even through nature, he reveals himself. And since all of us are uniquely made, what grabs my heart and my attention may be different than what grabs your heart and your attention. The disciples, for some reason, the feeding of the 5,000 wasn't the anchoring point for them, but this miracle on the water was. And I find that's been true in the stories I've heard from people. What God used to draw one person to faith is different than what he used to draw another person to faith, what he used to strengthen your faith, what he used to deepen your faith. Our God is so intimate in his relationship with his creation. He will use his word and his people and his spirit to meet you right where you are at, to show you his greatness and his power, and he deals with each and every one of us uniquely. And he does that for the disciples. Feeding 20,000 is pretty amazing with a little kid's lunch. But it took them getting on a boat in the middle of the night and Jesus walking by and calming the storm for them to be like, you truly are the Son of God. Do not be afraid. Those words are reminiscent of Isaiah 41:10. It says, fear not, for I'm with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Deuteronomy 31, be strong and courageous. Do not fear or be in dread of them, for it is the Lord your God who goes with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. In the New Testament, God repeats words like this. He says, he is with you. The Spirit of God is in you. And it doesn't matter what life throws at you. I believe we can echo the words of Jesus to his disciples in our own lives. Do not be afraid. One of the things that grips many of us is the fear of man. And the Psalms tells us the fear of man brings what? A snare. Sometimes we fear the financial pressures we're in. Sometimes we fear the next season of life that you're going into. I know we got a few in here that are either just entering retirement or getting close to it. I can only imagine how fearful that must be. Do I got everything lined up? Are the finances going to last? What am I going to do with my time? Do I still know my spouse? I'm going to be spending 40 hours a week. Are we going to still get along when it's not just in the evenings and weekends? I mean, all those things that may go through your mind. I got a kid going to college, and 2 years after that, another one. 2 years, they keep coming. Decisions have consequences. No, I'm just joking. I'm a little fearful. How do we help them pay for this? How do we, when they get to college, they're on their own, and like my influence changes greatly at that point. And I'm not fearful, it doesn't grip me, I'm excited, But there's a part of me like, man, my hands have, God's going to force them like this because I'm not in control of anything. I never have been. But when your kids are little, you kind of feel like you got some control, don't you? As they get older, it feels like you got less and less control. And as they leave the house, I'm not fearful, but I have concerns. What's that going to look like, God? I think God would say to us, whatever season we're in, whatever struggle in, says, fear not. I'm with you. Do not be afraid because I'm your God. The disciples were going across the lake, and he starts walking by, and they're terrified. And they were probably terrified by the ghost that they thought they were seeing more than just the winds, but it was probably a culminating effect, wasn't it? They were already on edge. You can imagine driving through a blizzard, been there before, white-knuckling it, the snow's coming, you can't stop for whatever reason, and everything is really tense. If your kid turns on the radio, turn that off. I can't hear while I'm driving. Kids are like, stop it. It's like the last straw. And you kind of wonder where the disciples there. They've been rowing for a long time, hours. I can't take one more thing. And then, oh no, the ghost that's going to take us is here. And Jesus says in the midst of it, fear not, it is I. Don't be afraid. I always want to be careful to be true to the text. And like I said before, and I talked to one of my friends who preached through John, and I go, how'd you deal with this text? I don't know what to do with it yet. I don't know why it's here. He goes, I don't know either. So I kind of attached onto another part. I'm like, thanks, you are no help, Mike. You're the worst. But as I've let it go through my mind and kind of settle in my heart, that's where I keep coming back to. It was common in Matthew's and Mark's and John. Jesus speaks to him and says, don't be afraid. And do you think it's right for us to take that to us today, wherever you're at? We have a God who lives in us through the Spirit of God. The Bible says, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. The Bible says, don't worry about tomorrow because tomorrow's got enough worries of its own. I clothe the lilies of the field. I feed the birds of the air. Don't you think I'm going to take care of you? Be anxious for nothing, but everything by prayer and supplication, let your requests be made known. I believe he would say to us in whatever season we're in, it is I with you. Don't be afraid. We're going to close in prayer. We have the exciting opportunity to welcome some new individuals into our church family, and God has brought some that are on the shy side. So I say to them, do not be afraid. We're on your side. No. Let's pray. God, you're good. Thank you for your word. It is true. We thank you for